For the first minute, let's break down a Cold War shelter design that didn't just survive nuclear-era expectations, it literally defied blizzards. In regions where winter wasn't a season but an annual siege, Cold War planners faced a challenge that few people appreciate today. A shelter might withstand radiation, shockwaves and fallout, but none of that mattered if the entrance froze shut. Ventilation was blocked by drifting snow, or temperature swings caused internal condensation to form and ruin supplies. Engineers in the United States, Canada, the Soviet Union and Scandinavia had to build bunkers that would remain functional even during weeks of whiteout conditions. And the solution they developed became one of the most quietly brilliant shelter designs of the entire era. The snow-shedding, temperature-stabilized, above-grade, earth-bermed entryway combined with deep-set, passive air shafts. It was simple. It worked without machinery. And, in test after test, some lasting decades, it remained accessible and dry, even when buried under several meters of snow. The beauty of this method was that it didn't rely on heated entrances or forced air systems. It relied on geometry, earth mass, and airflow control. Fundamentals that performed consistently no matter how harsh the storm above. And long after power lines snapped, diesel froze, and equipment corroded, these entrances still operated. They allowed soldiers, civil defense teams, and maintenance crews to reach the shelter without hacking through ice or climbing down vertical shafts exposed to wind drift. If you care about practical Cold War engineering that still applies today, this winterproof entry system is one of the most valuable designs ever created. The key to the blizzard-proof shelter was shaping the entrance so snow could not accumulate against it. Engineers discovered that the worst snow problems didn't happen during storms. They happened afterward, when wind-driven drifts piled up against vertical or recessed entrances. So, instead of setting the door flush with the hillside, they built a gradual, triangular berm, projecting outward at a shallow angle. Snow, sliding down the slope, continued past the entrance instead of settling over it. The doorway itself was recessed just enough to avoid direct wind, but not deep enough to form a pocket where snow could compact. In practical modern terms, this means that anyone building a root cellar or storm shelter in a snowy climate should avoid putting a door directly into a vertical face. Instead, build an earthen ramp or wedge leading down toward the entrance. The angle of the berm forces snow to move naturally along its slope rather than piling up against the opening. For homesteaders, farmers or off-grid builders, this is an extremely effective way to ensure winter access without constant digging. Cold War shelters also survived blizzards because they used deep-set passive air shafts that couldn't be easily sealed by drifting snow. One of the biggest winter threats wasn't the entrance, it was ventilation. Standard roof vents or wall vents clog quickly when hit with wind-packed snow. Engineers solved this by digging air shafts down through the berm itself, routing air inward through a horizontal channel before it reached the shelter. The intake openings were positioned on the leeward side of the structure, often just above ground level, but buried under a protective hood of earth or stone. This meant that even if the surface was buried, the air channel inside remained open because the intake wasn't exposed to direct snowfall. Snow resting above the channel acted as an insulating layer rather than a blockage. The steady temperature of the earth surrounding the channel prevented freeze sealing, and the slow, controlled draw of air created a microclimate within the shaft that resisted condensation. Anyone building a cold climate storage vault today can use the same principle. Instead of placing vents at the top of a structure, run a horizontal intake through an earth berm. The soil maintains airflow temperature and prevents freezing, allowing passive ventilation even during severe winter storms. Another reason these shelters outlasted blizzards was the thermal mass created by earthen berms. Winter shelters, you see, fail not when they get cold, but when they experience rapid temperature swings. When warm interior air meets frozen exterior walls, condensation forms and eventually turns to frost. Cold War engineers countered this by burying large portions of the shelter under thick earth. The soil acted as a giant thermal buffer, keeping interior temperatures stable even when exterior temperatures jumped from mild to sub-zero within just a few hours. This is why, honestly, many Cold War bunkers remain surprisingly dry today. The thermal mass avoided condensation, which is really the enemy of any underground structure. In modern applications, this technique remains extremely effective. A partially buried food storage room or a shelter built with an earth berm on at least two sides will experience fewer humidity spikes and far less frost buildup. This creates a stable environment for long-term storage, even without artificial heat. The final piece of the blizzard-resistant design was the combination of drainage, slope, and controlled interior airflow. Snow always melts eventually, and the meltwater becomes a serious threat. Engineers address this by creating sloped floors immediately inside the entrance and installing gravel-filled trenches beneath the entry path. Meltwater, dripping from boots or equipment, drained through the gravel instead of pooling at the floor level. Combined with the passive airflow provided by the buried shafts, this prevented frost layers from building inside the shelter. Anyone maintaining a root cellar or an emergency shelter in cold climates can apply this directly. A sloped entry threshold leading to a gravel drain removes moisture before it spreads inside. This simple step dramatically extends the life of food stores, tools, and supplies. The enduring lesson from these Cold War shelters is that smart geometry and earth shaping beat high-tech solutions every time. These shelters didn't resist winter. They cooperated with it, using the mass and behavior of snow to their advantage. And decades later, many of them remain functional precisely because they relied on principles that do not break, freeze, or rust. If you want more deep Cold War engineering insights with practical lessons for today, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning and share this guide with fellow history buffs and resilience-minded viewers. The old world still has answers worth keeping.